And if you can believe it,
What?
more lembas bread. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about more gun stuff. As always. Is that too much?
I didn't expect that. I was like, where's he going with that?
Anyway, welcome to ICBTS. I'm Kyle. This is Brett, as always. And today we're talking about more gun stuff, just like always. So we're a little bit behind on this one, but we've just haven't had a minute to do it because we were doing the climate change one and whatever. Point is, so recently I and some other folks from Phoenix Ammunition attended let's see, what did they call it? They called a town hall to stop gun violence. That was what they called it, and we'll get into a little bit more about that later.
That is what it was ultimately called.
That is what it was ultimately called, right? So basically, we found out that our wonderful representative here in Michigan from the 11th District, Haley Stevens.
Not my representative.
Well, yeah, because you live in a hellhole. But
can you say that knowing your current representative?
Well, you don't even know who yours is, so you get out of here.
I've emailed her before, but I can't remember.
Anyway. So it was discovered that she was having a little meeting, so we decided to go, along with a lot of other pro-Second Amendment people, which I can tell you she did not anticipate. And so I don't like to go to things like this with the express intention of shouting anyone down or, not listening to what they have to say. We all have our biases. I went there having a pretty good idea of what they were going to say and what nonsense was going to happen. But I was like, okay, town hall, there'll probably be open mic. People will ask questions. Not open mic, but, there'll be a line. People will ask questions. Kind of your standard town hall format, right? Mm-hmm. Well,
as it probably should be.
Probably should be. Well, as soon as we got there, we discovered that how this was going to go. It was not a go up to the mic, ask your question scenario. It was you get to fill out a card with a question, and we're going to collect them all, and then we're going to pick the ones that we... So... Right from the get-go, this was all stacked, right? The deck was stacked immediately from the start, okay? But I could tell in walking in that probably 70% of the crowd was pro-gun people, and I was like, okay, well, this could get interesting really fast. So they start the meeting, they start talking, and again, right away, it was pretty much... with the first question that they asked, let me go back a little bit. So they introduced all of, there was three. There was Haley Stevens, there was a state representative, and then I think there was like a local, city council person or something like that. And they all kind of introduced themselves, whatever, gave their, and from the beginning, it felt like a campaign commercial for Haley Stevens, right? Like her whole speech was like, oh, I grew up in District 11. I remember going to such and such park, blah, blah. And I remember everybody around there thinking like, okay, what?
Who cares?
Thought this was a town hall to end gun violence. Why are you doing a campaign pitch in here?
Was anyone filming that you
noticed? Yeah. I'm sure you can find it around. There was obviously reporters there. I can't remember what channel it was. But you can find it around if you search, Haley Stevens Gun Town Hall or something like that. I'm sure you can find video of it from multiple angles. But anyway, so right from the beginning, it was like, okay, this is just kind of weird. Like, I get you have to introduce yourself, but you don't have to go on like a 5-minute, this is my campaign stump speech, right? So then they got into the questions, and the first, and this was a while ago now, so I'm having to do this from memory, but the first question was effectively, and this is paraphrasing, but it was, what can we do as the state of Michigan to have a voice in the national conversation about gun violence? And I remember they asked that question, like the proctor read this question, and everybody in the crowd pretty much, obviously, so the first few rows, they had gotten their people there early, so the first few rows were all her people, and then the rest of the entire place was all pro-gun people. Mm-hmm. And everybody sort of looked at each other and groaned. Oh, this
Sweet.
Is what we're doing. This is just nonsense. Right? So that made me annoyed right from the start. Okay, we're not actually talking about anything. And then she went on for probably 2 minutes and had not said anything that was at all relevant to the question she had been just asked.
Like what?
Again, it's been a minute, so I'm not going to sit here and like put words in her mouth like she said this or that. But after about 2 minutes, people started yelling, "Answer the question," right? People loudly started yelling. She could hear us. "Answer the question." "Okay, answer the question." And she never answered the question. She basically went on about how, where she came from and Michigan's such a great place and all this stuff. And finally at the end, wrapped it up with, "And we have a gun violence problem and we need to be a part of that conversation." And it was like, yeah, I know. The question was, what can we do to be a part of that conversation? You rambled for 3 minutes and then wrapped up by reiterating the question.
So she's trying to just kill time and
exactly
distract.
And so they only actually went through about 5 or 6 questions, right? Because right from that point, it became very clear that this was not going to be productive in any way, shape, or form. This was just politicians are going to politic, and they're going to say nonsense, and you got to sit there and listen because we're going to moderate the questions, right? Mm-hmm. So the next question was effectively the same question again, but reworded such that it was like, what can we do here in the state of Michigan to have a conversation about gun violence? So that they just like stepped it down a level so that the state representative could have a crack at it, right? So then we again, people are yelling. It's getting kind of heated at this point because people are getting annoyed. People are yelling lots of things. So then they finally got on to what I think was probably the only relevant question of the night, which was a very pointed question. They are all for gun control, red flag laws. The state representative guy went on and on about red flag laws and how great he thinks they are because he apparently carries a constitution in his pocket. And at one point I yelled at him, "Why don't you read it sometime? Because I think you missed maybe amendments 2, 4, 5, and 6. You might want to go and double check on those ones." Mm-hmm. Because he basically kept making the argument that red flag laws are okay because they are due process. Because it's only certain people that can do it in your immediate family. And I wanted to be like, oh, okay, so we get to circumvent due process as long as my dad does it?
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't understand. That's not due process. Oh, but you have to go in front of a judge. Okay, but what crime have I committed that I'm going in front of the judge for? Because you can only arrest me, put me in front of a judge if I'm being accused of committing a crime. Mm-hmm. So what crime am I accused of having committed?
Bad thoughts.
Oh, well, we think you're a danger to yourself or others. Okay, you think that, or my sister thinks that. What crime have I committed to be brought in front of a judge? Mm-hmm. And he can't answer the question because there isn't one in the red flag laws. So it's not due process at all. But he sits there with his Constitution and tells everybody that, look, I carry around a Constitution, so I must know what I'm talking about. Right? So I don't
read it, though.
To get back to my point, the only relevant question was basically with the gun violence epidemic that's happening in Chicago, yet they have some of the strictest gun laws in the country. How do you explain this? Okay, so this was really the highlight of the evening because basically Haley Stevens got fed up with the fact that people were yelling at her to answer questions and she was not answering questions, and I think was frustrated that her town hall got all messed up by all these pro-gun people, right? So they
weren't letting me obfuscate the real questions being asked.
Exactly. So she basically stumbled over half a sentence and then decided to, and you can find this video, I'm sure, around. I think we posted it on the Phoenix page. It's been shared around. She stumbled over some words and then went to screaming like a banshee into the microphone. She screamed, "The NRA has got to go." And then you could tell it was funny because you could tell that everyone in the room was taking it. Even the anti-gun people, I feel like, that were in the front row were there was that much of a pause because everybody was like, what just happened?
Where'd that come from?
And then everybody processed it and the pro-gun people went yeah, and then got drowned by an entire room of booze and people yelling things at Haley Stevens, right? And she was standing there yup, NRA's gotta go, yup. And it was one of the most insane things I think I've ever witnessed in person, I'm going to be honest.
So you got the impression that was like that was her one-liner that
There
she'd
was
been saving
right.
up.
She was planning that line. Is my impression that
Yeah.
she had that line, and then when she didn't know where to go with the question, she just went to that, right?
It was her nuclear option.
Right. And so here's in an obvious attempt to rile the crowd, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's the breakdown of what effectively Haley Stevens just said with that. Okay, the NRA is always the boogeyman in here, which I find hilarious, but. The NRA...
Because they're the more
what is the NRA?
ones.
The NRA is a lobbyist group. Okay, fine. Yep, they're lobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
Made up of who? 4.5 million United States citizens that want to protect their gun rights. Now, I am no huge fan of the NRA myself because I personally don't think they go far enough.
Nope.
I think they're a bunch of bitches who, as soon as somebody said bump stock ban, they were like, yeah, do it!
That's fine.
Fine, just step on me, daddy. I don't care.
Ugh.
Right? So, but to break it down, Haley Stevens effectively said 4.5 million legal U.S. citizens who formed a group to lobby for gun rights, they have to go.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how that is any different than when Donald Trump said Ilhan Omar and the squad have to go back to their countries. How is that any different? She basically just told 4.5 million Americans that your organization has to go.
Mm-hmm.
You should not be allowed to have a voice. You have to go away. How are those two things any different? They're not. The NRA is a citizens organization, a citizens lobby group. It's not even some, and you could say, oh, well, they just take money from the big corporate gun industry. And it's like, dude, the gun industry is like minuscule as compared to most other industries. And we're constantly under threat of not having jobs when we wake up in the morning because some congressman or president or whomever decided to make some new law. So like, yeah, the gun industry needs the NRA just as much as the citizens do. But in essence...
It's not like a big oil company which is sending its own lobbyists. This is private citizens giving them money, say, hey, please fight for my rights.
Right. And, I mean, to be honest, I think Gun Owners of America is a better group for that anyway, but that's a different conversation. So, yeah, so she yelled that out, and then that was basically the breaking point, where now I said, okay, well, if that's where we're going to go, then we're just going to yell whatever we want during this whole thing. Mm-hmm. So then, after that erupted, the state congressman came up and decided to mansplain a little bit because Haley was inadequate at answering the question, so he had to quickly try to cover that by grabbing the microphone from her and running up there and being like, I'll field this one, Haley. And I was like, and I yelled something about mansplaining. And he then proceeded to blame Chicago's violence problem on Indiana, which is the classic bait and switch. Mm-hmm. He basically said, well, you know, Chicago's high gun violence rates, even though they have these laws, are because it's easy to get a gun in Indiana. And so they just go there and do it and bring it back. And that's why we need red flag laws, and that's why we need to limit how many guns you can buy at once so people can't do this. He basically used it as a jumping off point to get into that. And so this is a myth that's been debunked 1,000 times. It's really easy to debunk. Okay, So here's the thing. There are major cities in Indiana. Indianapolis.
What?
Great example, right? That don't have nearly the gun violence rates that Chicago does. Mm-hmm. So explain that to me. It's Indiana's lax gun laws that are causing Illinois' problems, yet somehow you would then think that Indiana must be some sort of Mad Max style wasteland of just gun violence, right? But it's not as compared to Chicago. So don't really know what to tell you about that one there, bro.
I'm lost.
Sorry, you kind of lost me with that one. So yeah, it effectively no answer to that question, right? And then they asked a question about manufacturing technology and the booming economy and how Michigan can be a part of that, which by my count has nothing to do with guns, which everyone then began yelling, what does this have to do with guns? And then Haley started trying to answer the question, and everybody basically was shouting her down because what does this have to do with guns?
I bet you they brought that one up because they're like, all right, we need to cool this down a little bit.
So then they finally got to the final question, which was, with, because and conveniently right before this meeting, the FBI had released their 2018 crime statistics, which was super convenient because they found that there was what was the exact number? 273 or 243?
I don't remember.
It doesn't matter.
You can look it up.
243, 273, somewhere in that range. Number of people killed in 2018 with rifles of all kinds. That means assault weapons, AR-15s, hunting rifles, so that's not even limited to the quote-unquote assault weapons. That is all types of rifles. So we're having a town hall meeting about which and you can say all you want, oh well it's handguns too, but they talked about was assault weapons. That's all they talked about. 200, we'll just call it 300. 300 people in 2018. That's what we were having this meeting about. And the question was, with that being the number, and I think it was something like 6,000 teens per year in the state of Michigan, like committing suicide. I think the number was 6,000. Don't quote me on that. But basically a massive number. As we all know, suicide rates among teens are skyrocketing. Why are we having a town hall about gun violence and not a town hall about suicide rates? And then they basically tried to say, oh, well, they killed themselves with guns, so that counts.
That's the...
Oh, so the fact
let's not fix the root of the problem.
Right, let's just say, well, if they can't shoot themselves, then...
They're fine.
They're fine. Let's not try and figure out why all of a sudden teens are massively depressed and killing themselves. Let's not have a meeting about that.
That's not the real problem.
Right, that's not the real problem here.
Good God.
So basic insanity. And then they basically ended the meeting because of fears of violence, right? Which there was no violence. There was yelling. There was lots of yelling, but there was no violence, period. And then they basically ran out of the place as fast as they could, right? And so now with knowing all of that, here's the real interesting part. So what I didn't tell you at the beginning of this video is that this rally was held at a gun club.
Oh.
Multi-Lake Sportsman Association. We were literally standing in a room that is used for shooting.
Oh.
So why on earth would someone have a rally? Because they wanted to hear voices from both sides.
Don't.
No. That is not why. That is what they wanted you to think. Because, and here's the proof. The proof is in the pudding, right? It's all speculation until you can find out. Well, the reality is the reason we didn't find out about this town hall until like basically the Friday before it happened, or like basically a couple of days before it happened, was because Haley Stevens and her crew booked the venue at Multi-Lakes under a different name. Because the group's actual name that booked the venue is Femmes for Dems. Feminists for Democrats.
Feminists.
Whatever. Femmes for Dems, okay? Which would be a huge giveaway to the conservative gun club that's hosting this meeting that, okay, well, what's this meeting about? Why, right? So they don't want to say it. So what did they instead say their group was called? They said their group was called Femmes for Life, which was very aptly chosen. Because
that
now
doesn't move the meter.
It sounds like possibly an anti-abortion group. Right. You know, women against abortion or something like that, which isn't going to move the meter. Yeah, you need a place to have a meeting? Sure, fine. Right? So then when they found out that, oh, it's not Femmes for Life, it's Femmes for Dems, and you're hosting a town hall about gun violence that you didn't tell anybody that's what was happening here at our gun club, and you're a rabidly anti-gun Democrat, oh, okay, well, that changes things a little bit. So that's when Multi-Lakes got in touch with us and many other people and said, hey, we need support down here, and we obliged. We filled the place. Like I said, it was probably 70% pro-gun people, and that's why I think this was as much of a victory as it could be. It showed Haley Stevens for what she is. She's a rabid authoritarian. She's a liar. And this was an attempt, in my opinion, by her to host a campaign rally and be able to, once the event was over, say, look, I hosted a town hall about gun violence at a gun club. See, I'm crossing the aisle. And here's video of me saying the NRA has got to go and everyone cheering at a gun club. Can you believe it? Those were going to be the headlines. but we managed to make that not work for her. And I'm very happy to say that. Because this was, once you look at all of these facts, it's very transparent as to what was trying to happen here. And the entire thing was absolute, abject insanity. Listening to people who claim to be upholding the Constitution that can't even understand the nonsense of Indiana is not at fault for Chicago's gun crime, right? That's insane. I'm just going to start blaming all U.S. gun crime on Mexico. That's my next plan. Okay? It's insanity. So, I don't know. Final thoughts, conclusions here. Haley Stevens, if you vote for Haley Stevens, if you're in District 11, don't. For the love of God, stop. She is in. We talked about the left, right, up, down, right, in our last sort of political compass update. She's up here. She's in the authoritarian strata. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be voting for her. And how do I know that? Because she apparently hates when citizens organize and create a lobbyist group to defend their own rights.
And have an opinion other than hers.
Right. She apparently hates anyone that has an opinion other than hers. She can't even adequately form an argument as to why she holds the position she holds and has to have the state representative take over for her because she doesn't know how to answer the question. This is the person that is currently representing our district and in the U.S. Congress, and she needs to go.
Oh,
see what I did there? See what I did there?
He took it and he turned it.
I took it and I turned it around. Yes, she needs to be voted out of office presently, immediately, as soon as is humanly possible.
You know what really scares me the most? That scares me the most out of all this is it really opened my eyes to make me wonder, how often does that go how they plan?
Right, exactly. How many times has someone or some politician done this exact same thing?
On both sides.
Right, exactly. It doesn't matter what side. Where you see some article where they're like, I talked to the other side of the aisle about this and look what they said. And you're like, oh, wow, that's really bad. Now that I've seen this firsthand, the manipulation, I don't believe a single one of them. I will never believe one of those articles again. How could I?
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, it was proof positive. It was a bunch of politicians who are literally just trying to get elected by saying what they think everybody wants to hear. They don't care about the Constitution. He can talk all day long about how he carries around a copy of the Constitution.
That he doesn't read.
Cool, bro. Good to know, man. You should check that out sometime and maybe actually understand what it says.
Yeah, right? Maybe he does read it. He just doesn't listen to what he's reading.
You can read and not comprehend. That's possible, right?
I do that all the time.
Good Lord. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on Haley Stevens, and I don't know who her challenger might be at this point or anything like that, but
I'd vote for a sock.
Instead of Haley Stevens. I'd vote for a cat. I'd vote for my cat. My cat's going to run for office. That's my new plan.
Which one? The big one?
Yeah. Chonk Monster. Chonk Monster for Congress. 2020. Anyway.
That's going to be my write-in. Oh, I'm not in your district.
I know.
Damn it.
ICBTS, don't put Twinkies on your pizza, or Brett will come to your house and give you a stern look. Out.